Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion of the forgotten collectible card games of old. Collectible card games that have sort of fallen by the wayside. Either they're not getting products produced from them anymore, player base has shrunk to almost nothing, whatever reason, they have faded to near obscurity. This time I'm continuing with my discussion on the third collectible card game that ever came out, Vampire the Eternal Struggle. I've been talking about the rules to play, and of course, for a bunch of episodes here, I've been talking about the most complex and difficult part of your entire phase of your turn, the minion phase. We got some more to talk about, too. Let's talk about, because we were talking about attacking each other, minions doing that, let's talk about resolving those strikes. So, strikes resolve in a number of different ways. First off, if it's a hand strike, that means effectively it's a punch your minion's throwing against the other one. This is the default strike. This is done at close range, and it has your minion deal damage to the opposing minion equal to their strength. A minion's default strength is, of course, 1. Now, the burn equipment effect does just that. It burns a piece of equipment on the opposing minion. You'll be declaring what equipment you're attempting to burn when you're basically declaring what strike you're using and showing off what strike you're using, so they already know what's being targeted. That equipment is still used during this strike, and its effect will be put during this entire thing. It's just that it will not be able to be used on any other rounds or other strikes after this. It is important to note here that certain burn effects will say burn weapon only, and therefore you could only target a weapon with the burn effect, not any piece of equipment. Similar to this, there is the steal equipment. This functions pretty much the same way as the burn, except instead of burning said equipment that you are declaring, you are stealing it. You're effectively taking it from the opposing minion and putting it on your minion. Now, just like before, this equipment is used as part of this entire set of strikes, but it is important to note, this piece of equipment cannot be used during this current round of combat. The stolen equipment is retained by that minion after the combat, though, so they have indeed stolen it. Now, first strike is just that. A minion with first strike strikes first. They have their strike occur before the opponent's strike would occur. So that means if my strike would cause an opponent to be burned or go to torpor, that opponent, well, they don't get their strike back. Their strike is canceled. Similarly, if I'm stealing a piece of equipment or a weapon that gave them the strike that opposing minion would be using, then that strike is also canceled. I can effectively cancel my opponent's strike by striking first, by resolving first. If both of us have first strike, well, we both strike at the same time then. We're both striking first. Combat ends effects still resolve before first strike. And dodge will also affect first strike, though, too. So I could dodge a first strike. Now, dodge is just that. A dodge strike does no damage. But guess what it does? It protects your minion and their equipment from the strike effects of the opposing minion. Now, this does not protect your retainers. They're wide open to things still. But your minion will be taking no damage by using a dodge, and also will, of course, keep their equipment. Dodge does work against first strike. Now, combat end effects does just that. It ends combat. Ends it right away. And this happens before every other strike, including first strikes. So all other strikes that would be occurring, canceled. Because combat ends. It ends before any of them are resolved, and just like dodge, combat end effects are effective at any range. I can dodge at any range, I can end combat at any range. Combat end effects also are not affected by dodge. You can't dodge out of the way of this because dodge is specifically for avoiding that strike incoming. Combat ends affects everything. It ends all combat. So the steal blood effect, effectively you steal blood counters or life counters from the opposing minion. This does not count as damage, so it cannot be prevented by things that prevent damage. This also occurs before the healing phase of the damage resolution part of this entire thing. So the stolen blood could be used by your minion that just stole it to heal damage that's being dealt by the strike by the other minion. Even if the two are dealing damage to themselves simultaneously, it can be effective here. Now, it is important to note that if your minion steals more blood than they can carry, any excess is burned off back into the blood bank. They can only get up to their normal maximum. So let's talk about damage, because damage is resolved in 2 steps. Damage reduction, damage prevention, and then healing. Damage prevention is just that. You use cards and effects that prevent some of that damage. You see how much damage is being dealt to your minion, and you will then use the cards or the effects to reduce that damage either until the damage goes to 0, or you run out of ways to prevent damage. Then the remaining damage is, of course, dealt to your minion. Then you have the option, of course, to possibly heal up some of this. The damage has been inflicted. If your minion is a vampire, they can attempt to heal it. If your minion is not a vampire, then if it has life counters, those life counters are reduced by the damage dealt to it. It effectively has taken that damage that way. For each point of damage that is dealt to a vampire, they burn off 1 of their blood. Now, this happens until they burn off all of their blood or successfully reduce the damage to 0 that's being dealt to them. Effectively, they heal up all the damage dealt to them with their blood. This doesn't have a negative effect if they have to burn all their blood in order to prevent all the damage to them. If they can't burn enough blood to heal themselves all the way up, they burn all the blood they have available, and then the remaining damage is effectively dealt to the vampire, and they become wounded. Wounded vampires are moved to Torpor, where, of course, they have to deal with the remaining damage that's been dealt to them before they can return from Torpor. So it is important to note there is no negative effects if they have to burn off all their blood to prevent all the damage. They just do it. They protect themselves. As long as they have the blood to prevent that, they don't have to worry about becoming wounded and heading to Torpor. Now, some damage is described as aggravated. This is things such as fire, sunlight, and the claws of supernatural creatures. Aggravated damage functions just like normal damage, except 2 ways. First off, aggravated damage cannot be healed. That's the big one. Second off, aggravated damage, if it's dealt to a wounded creature, burns it. Well, can burn it. So aggravated damage that is dealt to a vampire says it cannot be healed. That means they lose no blood in attempts to effectively remove aggravated damage. This unfortunately means that once a vampire is dealt aggravated damage, it instantly becomes wounded and heads to Torpor. There is no steps of attempting to prevent this because it's aggravated damage. Aggravated damage done to a wounded vampire could possibly burn them. The situations where this is that they are wounded and could take aggravated damage is if they've just taken damage and are heading, it would be that they couldn't prevent, if they are in Torpor, or are they on their way to Torpor. Of a wounded vampire, each point of aggravated damage dealt to them, they must burn 1 blood, this is an already wounded vampire, or if they cannot burn 1 blood per point of aggravated damage being dealt to them, they are burned. They are destroyed. And this method of destruction doesn't count as Diablo, which we will talk about also. But just to know, they need enough blood equal to the aggravated damage being dealt to this wounded vampire and spend it, burn it, or be burned themselves. Now, if regular and aggravated damage are dealt to a minion at the same, both dealt to a minion, they are resolved at the same time effectively. They are both being dealt to the minion at the same time. Though the reaction to damage is handled by regular damage first. You would, of course, be spending blood in order to try to prevent the regular damage from wounding them and burning them before you'd even worry about the aggravated damage. This, of course, only applies to non-prevented damage, damage you didn't prevent. It is important to note that damage prevention methods can be chosen to used on aggravated damage before normal damage if you're being dealt both of them. So if I have prevention methods, I probably want to use them on the aggravated first and worry about the normal afterwards. If normal damage is not handled, he becomes wounded and goes to Torpor. If aggravated damage causes him to go to the ash heap, he doesn't even go to Torpor first, he goes directly to the ash heap. Okay, that's it for today. I talked about resolving damage. Pretty much not everything you could resolve, but most of what you could resolve when it comes to damage. I talked about the damage-related effects, strike-related effects, things that happen as a result of a strike, and some of the unique ones which are important to know about. These are all very common ones I handled, so I did want to talk about them. They're not really specific to cards. These are ones that you're going to hit a lot. Then I talked about resolving damage itself. How damage is more than likely, if you don't have enough blood, going to make you wounded and send you to the torpor. Or if it's aggravated, it very well could burn your vampire out of existence and destroy it. It can very well happen. And both damages can happen at the same time. You can have normal damage and aggravated damage happen to you. Prevention is the good way of stopping it, but you might not have enough prevention. You might have to worry about your vampire going to torpor or the ash heap. In the next episode, we're going to move on, though, and start talking about torpor. And, of course, talk a little bit of retainers when it comes to strikes and damage. But if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything that you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you could always check out my Patreon, link description below. Have some great rewards there. And of course, your support helps grow and make the channel better. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.